feel like there were so many times when I'm just sitting there like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, what is even happening? I bet you can't guess what my favorite genre is. These lips, my cheeks, but these kisses take trips to San Francisco, double disco. Hello cottagers, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I want to preface this video with letting you guys know that we do in fact live on a houseboat, so you are probably going to hear some sounds that is a little complicated for me to try to get rid of for this video. So all that being said, let's get started. So this video, I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in June. June was a bit of a crazy month for me. If you watched any of my recent videos, I kind of talk about that. And if you follow me on Instagram, then you may or may not have seen an Instagram story where I talk about how I was just having a rough time. June was crazy busy. We had a church camp that we went to, and then as soon as we got home, we had my grandmother's big birthday surprise where we had our entire family come in for the weekend, and then as soon as they left, me, Cody, and our daughter, we all got really sick for the entire week. And we are still, oddly enough, recovering from this. We feel perfectly fine, but we do still have a cough that just decides it's going to periodically pop up. So that's been super fun. But with that, on top of me just being, I got behind on everything with YouTube, and then I am such a, I'm an overachiever and I am a perfectionist whenever it comes to a lot of things. I realized that my mental state was going downhill and my spiritual state was going downhill, so I figured I'm going to take a step back and I am going to just take this time to read books that I want to read. I'm not going to create any content, and I'm going to focus on my family and focus on just getting better, so that by the time July rolled around, I'd be perfectly fine and ready to go, which is exactly what happened, and it's exactly what I needed. So this reading month was a bit all over the place, which is pretty normal for me because I try to read a very wide range of books. But I would also say that it wasn't my favorite reading month. We had some good books in there, but then we also definitely had some duds. Without further ado, let's get into this. The first two books I'm going to talk about, I do not have the physical copies because I ended up lending them to my friend because I enjoyed them so much. The very first one that I read is called The Last Thing He Told Me. This is by Laura Daves. This book was so good. I read it in one day because I was just hooked from the very beginning. Of course, I was fascinated by the fact that they live on a houseboat, so I'm like, ditto, you know? But I loved that this was a newish concept whenever it came to books for me, because I just don't really read a whole lot of books that have to do with anything that is espionage or anything that has to do with deep family secrets that are tied to things that aren't necessarily like murder or, you know, like affairs. I don't love those kinds or whatnot, but this went so much deeper than any of that. Those things weren't actually a part of it, which was fascinating. Well, I guess they kind of were, but this wasn't a murder mystery, and I love me a good murder mystery, oddly enough. And this one just, it had me going. It had me going. You were following a wife of somebody, and she has a, not adopted, but she married the man who has a daughter, and so she is now the stepmom to this daughter. The stepdaughter and her don't necessarily get along. They don't really see eye to eye, even though they've been trying to work on this relationship. Well, all of a sudden one day the dad's business is basically ransacked by the police. The bosses are taken to prison, all this stuff, and then you learn that the husband's actually missing now. So they're trying to figure out exactly what is going on. And so you're following this wife and his daughter, so her stepdaughter, as they are trying to understand, where did the husband go, and is he coming back home? What can we do to bring him back home? And it's just a wild, wild trip. It really is. But it was an enjoyable, I mean, it was enjoyable for me. For the characters, they probably didn't enjoy it as much. But it was an enjoyable time for sure. I highly recommend this book if you like ones that keep you at the edge of your seat, but aren't like over the top, you know, James Bond and gore and stuff like that. Like, I don't like those sort of things. And so this book was perfect for me. The next book that I read was The Woman in the Library, and this, I'm probably going to butcher her name, is by Solari Gentile, I believe is how you say it, but wonderful book. I really, really liked this one. I forgot to say, I gave the other book 4 mushrooms, and if you're new here, I always rate my books with mushrooms because we love cottagecore, and so mushrooms. So this book, I actually gave 4 mushrooms as well. I really, really liked this style of writing, but I do have to say that I started listening to it as an audiobook while I was busy doing other things, and then I was going to pick up the actual book, the physical book, and start reading along with it. but I realized I was so confused when I first started listening to the audiobook. I highly, highly, highly recommend reading this one. Either tandem read it with the audiobook or just read the physical copy, because it is a bit confusing if you can't see what is going on. So this story is the first of its kind that I've read. It was an absolute trip. You have someone who is an author who is corresponding with someone else, and the guy that she's corresponding with is kind of like giving remarks, like he's like a beta reader in an area that she is trying to write this story in. So he's kind of giving her like tidbits and stuff, because this was written during the pandemic, and so that created like she couldn't go to these places to figure this stuff out on her own. She needed someone who lived there to help her write the story. So you have his correspondences, and then you get into the chapters, which are the chapters that this author who was corresponding with the guy wrote. Okay, so you have that happening. And in this book that she is writing, she's writing about authors who are writing books. So you have like layer upon layer upon layer of things going on. That was wild, and I loved it. I was absolutely there for the entire thing. I was obsessed. I loved how many mysteries were happening in this story. It was just so good. I really, really enjoyed this. The only reason that I did not give this 5 mushrooms is because there was a little bit of stuff that was happening that just didn't quite make sense, and then there were things that seemed too coincidental. And if you know anything about me, I don't love books that rely heavily on coincidence, because to me that just feels like easy writing. Even though this book was amazing, I know it was not easy writing. I just don't love those things. So it was a 4 for me, but I am so excited to pick up any other book that is written by Solari. And I know she has a new one out that I'm definitely looking forward to getting. Then the next book that I read is The House on Foster Hill. This is by Jamie Jo Wright. This is a Christian thriller suspense mystery, and I really enjoyed it. It was not what I was expecting, because I am quite used to reading just contemporary thrillers or contemporary mysteries and things like that. And so having the faith aspect of this was really, really wonderful. I really enjoyed this story. It was a little hard to follow at times, but I really think that that was just me, because I read this while we were at church camp, and then I read this while we were also sick, so it was very hard for me to focus on things. But this was a very wonderful story about a woman who basically was redeeming her past, and she was trying to give of herself in ways that she hadn't before, just because her past was hard. Her past, she dealt with her husband dying, and she always believed that her husband was murdered, but nobody else would believe her, and so then she also felt like she was crazy. And so you get to kind of see this redemption story happening with her. But not only that, you also learn the house that she moves into, because she wants to give back to basically her husband's memory. She learns that there was actually a past there, and it was a mysterious past, and it was one that she somehow was connected to. So it was really, really cool. I enjoyed this book. This one was a 4 mushroom for me as well. And then the next book I did own, but I got rid of. It is called Spy School. I thought that I would really, really enjoy this series, but I did not, because I liked that it was fast paced. I liked that there was some humor to it, but I don't love whenever I am reading a book that is set for a specific age and the writing is outside of that age, if that makes sense. So this book was written for like middle grade, so you're thinking, it states on there that this is for anyone from 8 to 12 years old. And as I'm reading it, I'm trying to imagine as well, like my daughter reading this stuff at 8 to 12. And I wouldn't let her, to be really honest. I would not let her. There was more language in this than most other books. So I was kind of shocked with that. And then I was also shocked that just like the way you're following a boy, and so you're kind of like in his mind about, you know, what's going on, and just kind of the way that he would talk about the women. I didn't like that. So I did finish this, but I'm not going to rate this book. I did not like it. The next one that I read was actually a Patreon pick, and that is The Defense by Stephen Kavanaugh. I can never remember. This was a really good book. I actually really enjoyed it. It was not my cup of tea, because I don't really read types of books like this, but I did still enjoy it enough to where I'm interested enough to read more of his series. The whole reasoning why I actually gave it a lower score than what I think my Patreon was hoping I would is because it kind of felt like some parts were just a little too fast paced, where all of a sudden we're somewhere and we're like, wow, how did we get here? This is crazy, you know? And that's probably just how it's supposed to be written, you know? Like this kind of gave me the like 24 feel, you know what I'm talking about? That show 24, where everything is very, very fast. A lot of things are happening, but there were also times within that show that I was thinking the same thing, like, how in the world is this happening that quickly? You know, like in reality, I don't think that that'd be a thing, but also this is a book, it's not real. So, you know, maybe I need to give it some grace. But I still really liked this. I love a good story about a dad and a husband going above and beyond what he needs to protect his family. Love this sort of stuff. So I am very excited to read the next installment. After that, I read a buddy read with my friend Amy Marie from Books with Amy Marie, and I absolutely loved it. This is Sense and Second Degree Murder. This is part of the Jane Austen mystery series, and the first one, Pride and Premeditation, I adored, and so I was so ready to read the second one. And so whenever she said she wanted to buddy read this, I was like, yes! One of my favorite people, also reading what has now become one of my favorite series. This book was so good. It followed just like I was expecting it to, because Pride and Premeditation did such a good job of following the original story, but also being creative and witty and also original. Like, there was differences enough that it worked well, and it didn't feel like she just took the characters and plopped them in a completely different story. This story was so good. I just loved that we were also getting the perspective of multiple sisters, and that we were also getting the perspective of different men that were a part of this. And it was hard because the person that died was the father, and he was dearly loved, and you could just see the hurt that was happening with the girls and with the mom from losing this beloved father. And so that was really, really tough, but it was really cool to see these women in action. And one of them, she is obsessed with like science, and that was not a normal thing at that time. And I liked that so much. Seeing a woman in STEM was wonderful, and to see that in action. And then also you could tell that the author, she clearly did a lot of research on what was going on. I can't tell you why I think this, because it gives away the entire story. But she did so much research on how things were happening at this time that whenever she put it into the story, it's like, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. And this is in ways that I would never have thought, because I don't live in that time period, so things are different nowadays. And it was so good. It was so good. I loved the first one, and I loved the second one. So this one was 5 mushrooms for me. Then after that, I was still very much on a mystery kick, so I decided to read Veronica Speedwell, The Curious Beginning. I really enjoyed this. I gave this one 4 mushrooms. I loved the witty banter between her and the main man, and I loved the actual story that was unfolding. I liked her character because I don't remember what it's called, but she does butterflies. She knows everything about butterflies, and she collects them and she sells them and things like that. And I really, really like that because it's so new. It kept reminding me a little bit of Emily Wilde, and I liked that because I love Emily Wilde. But my one caveat, and this is something that I know other people are going to actually praise the book for, and that is totally okay. But for me, I just didn't like the fact that she was as open with her promiscuity as she was. It just kind of felt like, I don't know, just kind of like, that's not needed. It's not necessary, but it wasn't enough to where I'm not interested in the next book. I really want to continue on this series. I want to see what's going to happen with her character, and how in the world is she going to get into these other crazy situations, because what happens in this one is quite bonkers. And I loved it. She is trying, of course, to solve a murder that she honestly didn't even believe was happening. She didn't believe that she was a part of it. She didn't believe all this sorts of stuff. And so once the truth starts coming out, it was just kind of like, yeah, you should have known. And it was just fun. It was so much fun reading this book. I had a great time with it. And again, I really cannot wait to read the next book. Next on our list, this is actually the Patreon book club pick for the month, and that is Starsight. This is the second installment in the Skyward series. This is by Brandon Sanderson, who I am obsessed with. I love Brandon Sanderson. I have yet to read anything of his that I don't like, and so he is definitely one of my absolute favorite authors of all time. This book was great, but it wasn't as good as the first one, which the first one I was a little torn on until I started discussing it, and then I realized, like, no, okay, it's actually a 5-star read. This one, is only a 4 mushroom for me. And that is because it was mainly politics, and that is okay. It is building up for the rest of the series, but I still really enjoyed this. We got to meet all sorts of new characters. We got to meet different types of characters because this is in outer space. So you do have aliens, you do have different life forms out there. So that was really cool, and I love to see that imagination. But again, there was just a lot of politics, so it did feel like we were slogging through quite a bit of stuff. But I love that we got to see Mbot. I love that we got to meet some new people. And one of my favorite quotes now is, my. If you've read this, you understand what I'm talking about, because it's just said so often and it's said in such a quirky way. I really, really enjoyed this, and I'm so excited. We're actually going to be reading Cytonic this month as our buddy read for my Patreons. So if you want to jump in with that, there is a link down below where you can join. I also have a Discord that is specifically for this bookish cottage, and you can join for free, where we can also talk about these books there. The next book that I read is The Last Murder at the End of the World. This is by Stuart Turton, and I had a great time with this one. I picked this one up whenever we ran to a library for something for Piper, and then while we were there, I just saw it and I was like, I'm reading it, because that was my month of I'm not going to read anything on my list unless I want to, and this one is a book that I definitely want to read, and I'm so thankful that I did, because I had the best time with this book. I gave this one 4.5 mushrooms because it was unlike anything else I'd ever seen. It was definitely a genre blend if I've ever seen one, because you had your science fiction, but you also have your mystery that's happening, and how those two meshed together was beautiful. I loved this book. My only caveat that I would say for you guys is if you are listening on audiobook, then it is a little bit harder to figure out what is going on, because it is from a male narrator, but the mind that you're in is actually female, so it's a little confusing. But she's not female because she is an AI, but it is a she. So anyways, besides all that, it was still such a great time. I was actually physically reading this one as well, and whenever I did that, it was just like, oh my goodness, my heart was so happy. I mean, it was sad because of all the things that were happening, but what I really, really enjoyed about this is, so you're following these people who are on an island, and a murder happens, and they realize that when this murder happens, for one, like, they've never had to deal with this, so it was very confusing to them. They weren't really sure what was going on. But then it also unlocked this thing that was going to end the world. And so now they're trying to solve this murder before the end of the world, because hopefully it'll save the end of the world, that sort of stuff. There were so many layers to this, so much depth. I really, really enjoyed this, and I felt like we were left in the dark just as much as the characters were, which at first was annoying, but then the more I read, the more I was like, oh, I feel like I'm one of the villagers. I feel like I don't know what's going on just as much as they don't know what's going on, and that we're having to understand how this island functions. Like, there was no world building. It built as the book went on, and I loved that. It took me a while, but once I caught on that, oh my goodness, this is actually a very specific reason. At least I think. I might be giving Stuart too much credit, but I don't think that I am. I think that he genuinely wrote this almost as if we were one of those villagers sitting right beside them, trying to figure out this stuff and trying to figure out what exactly is this island and how is this island functioning and working, and like, what are we a part of? It was so good. If you want a mystery and you want something that's a little sci-fi, it's not heavy sci-fi, but if you want just enough sci-fi to really dip your toes in, this is the perfect book for that. I loved this book. And then next, you're probably going to pick up on a theme. I read another murder mystery, and that is A Lady's Guide to Etiquette and Murder. This one is by Diane Freeman, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 3.5 mushroom just because it was just kind of a simple book. You are following the main character whose husband has died, and now she's kind of left trying to pick up the pieces. And luckily she did prepare for herself, and her father helped prepare her for just in case something like this was to happen. So she was able to redeem herself. But then it's interesting because now, of course, when you come into money, all these people start coming out of the woodwork, and that's kind of what was happening here. It was such an interesting take on just a woman being a woman in this time period. I really appreciated that. The only reason why it got such a low rating for me was just because it was a very fast-paced book, and I really appreciate that, but I also felt like it kind of lagged in some areas, or it lacked in some areas where we didn't fully get to know the entire story just yet, and hopefully it will be explained in the next part of the series. I am excited to read the next part of the series and to continue on with this series. But it was just a cute time. It was a good, comfy, cozy time, and I really appreciate that. And so if you want something that's a good, cozy mystery that is also set in, you know, the Regency area, well, go pick this one up because you will definitely enjoy it. The last book that I read was The 10,000 Doors of January, and this is by Alex E. Harrow. And I bought this book because I kept seeing it all over the place and people were recommending it, and then this cover is just absolutely stunning and it absolutely fits my vibes, and I loved the idea of this story. This is a book about books for the most part, and the quotes in this book, like, I want to reread it just so I can annotate and get those quotes out of it, because there were so many amazing quotes where I felt like my soul is being seen by this author, because she clearly has a love of books like I do, and I appreciated that. I did not rate this as high as I was hoping I would. I genuinely thought that this was going to be a 5 mushroom read for me, but it wasn't. It was only a 3.5 mushroom for me. And that is because it got a little convoluted as the ending came about, because you are dealing with lots of different worlds as well. And so whenever you're dealing with different worlds, it got very hard to track what was happening and who was coming from where, how things were connecting, and it wasn't super explained, in my opinion. It kind of felt like we were trying to get to the end, because this is a pretty thick book. And so I felt like Alex may have just been saying we need to really wrap this up. And it was wrapped up well, but you were definitely left kind of guessing, which I think was a writer's choice, and that's okay. But I also just kind of became where I did not really love the main character, which was a little weird. And I tried to show a lot of grace because of the way that she was grown up, which you will understand when you read the book. But I just didn't really love her, and that could just be a personal thing. I'm not sure, but I did still enjoy this book. I am happy that I read this book, and I do still have a list of Alex E. Harrows that I'm going to be reading. So clearly it didn't turn me away from the author, and I still think that if you love books about books, that you will enjoy this. Now remember, this is a fantasy book. It is not a literary fiction, it is not literary fiction or general fiction. It's nothing like that. This is definitely a fantasy book. Well, that is all the books that I read for the month. I'm pretty sure there were other ones that I DNF'd, but I don't remember them, so it's not even worth bringing them up. But that was a pretty good month considering all that was happening. I had a great time reading all of these mysteries, and it really just got me thirsty for some more mysteries, so I'm excited to continue on in some of these. But just like I said earlier, I do have a Patreon you guys can join if you would like to become a part of that and see more in-depth things that we have going on. But then also I do have a Discord that you can join for free, where we can talk about all the books that I'm reading and all the books that you were reading this month. It is a great way to get to know other people and to get to meet other booktubers, and also just to get to meet people who love books. I thank you guys for being here, and I am so thankful that you have watched to this extent. Please like, comment, and share, subscribe, all that stuff, because it really helps my channel to grow, and I am so thankful for every single person who has become a part of my little corner of the world. I love you guys so very much, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye.